I, whenever I go to China, um, I feel that I see the benefits of EVs more powerfully than any statistic can tell me. When we look at studies, we can tell that in the large cities in China, particulate emission has gone down because of the EVification of the auto fleet. But unless you have gone for an early morning run in Shanghai or Beijing or Shenzhen, like I do, you will miss out on the biggest benefit of green transition. It is the decline in the sound level. These cities are quieter than ever before. In the morning when I run in Beijing, roads are full of cars, but they don't make any sound. So I can listen to my podcast, I can listen to music. So the decline in sound pollution, in addition to particulate emission, I think is a very powerful motivation for those who actually go and see that. They'll want that to happen in their own countries. Pak Basri, let's talk about the big story, the 8% growth. Going back to the Indonesia disappoints the bulls and the bears, and somewhere in the middle used to be the story 2 years ago. Where do you stand now?
Well, let me put this way. Bear with me if I'm talking with number, okay? This is the old number that we discussed about 2 years ago. Our incremental capital output ratio timer is about 6.6, 6.8 now. So 1% economic growth will require investment over GDP about 6.8%. So if you're talking about investment over you're talking about 8% economic growth, this will require investment over GDP 6.8 multiplied by 8. You're talking probably about 54% investment over GDP. So at this moment, our investment ratio to GDP is about 37 out of GDP 23,000. So you're talking probably about almost 9,000 trillion rupiah at this moment. Yeah, it's about 500 billion US dollar. If you want to grow by 8%, you have to increase the investment from 9,000 to around 12,000 trillion or even more. So you probably need to increase the investment at least by 30%. Now, the question is, how should we do this? The first answer is, we have to improve productivity in order to lower the I-core. Yeah, then if we, let's say, improve the productivity, we probably need less capital to produce the similar output, the same output. So improving productivity is the key. And if you're talking about improving productivity, then it means that we have to improve the quality of human capital, infrastructure, and governance. How should we do this? You know, during my time when I was at the MOF, we introduced the so-called the endowment fund for the scholarship. Is under the name of the LPDP. Now many Indonesian students get accepted in the top 200 universities in the world. But this will take one generation. So the best way to do it is to have this management or technology spillover from foreign direct investment. If you recall in the 80s, most of the Indonesian bankers were Citibank alumni because they have the best executive development program, right? So why don't we ask the private sector to do it and give the double deduction for tax if they do training? If you're talking about AI, why don't you ask NVIDIA, for example, to do a training rather than you build the government training center? That's one thing in improving the quality of human capital. So the government should work with the private sector definitely. I'm not a big fan of industrial policy, but I can see the justification, of industrial policy if you improve the quality of the human capital. The second aspect is continue to build an infrastructure, because with the aggressive development under Jokowi's administration, we are still deficient. Yeah, in terms of the infrastructure is still inadequate. And then governance. This is very important because let me be open and frank with you, Timer, even when I was in the cabinet, I said that one of the reasons of why many Indonesians become religious is because they have to deal with the government. So if you, let's say, if you apply on something, there is nothing you can do except pray to God because a lot of uncertainties. That is why this economic deregulation is very important. So I'm very happy, I'm glad, when the president made a decision that he announced that economic deregulation will be the top priority of his administration, and he announced it openly in public. He will remove the import quota. He will, change the local content requirement to become an incentive. He will remove the so-called the PERTEC, the technical regulation. I think this is one way, to improve the productivity. So provided the government can, fulfill all this requirement, that 8% will be possible. Without that, then will be difficult for us.
So one of the things that picking up from President Prabowo's administration is that they would like to see more competition, both from foreign capital coming into Indonesia as well as increasing domestic competition. But the last 30, 40 years of this nation, if we look at it, the track record is one where the vested interests thrive on the lack of competition. Is it really going to be possible to break that stronghold?
Well, let me put it this way. I always believe that bad times makes good policy. Yeah. Only during the bad times, politician will listen to the technocrat. You cannot expect that the politician will listen to the technocrat during the good times. Because what's the point to spend the political capital if the economic situation is already good? I was able to convince Pak SBY to adjust the fuel price by 45% because taper tantrum. And now the reciprocal tariff, the global situation, this will push the government to do the good things. And I think that's the reasons why the president announced the economic deregulation. So this is the Sudley's law. Bad times makes good policy, good times makes bad policy.
Well, finger crossed on that one. Green transition. When I visited Indonesia in recent years, I heard a lot about Indonesia's sort of goal toward wind energy, solar energy, tapping into its natural gas potential and so on. The US is sort of turning away from that. Is that going to have a negative impact on green transition in developing countries?
Definitely. I hate to say this, but I think, with the US withdraw from the Paris Agreement, for example, this will have this negative impact to the commitment towards that. Because you can see, my concern is, under this kind of situation, if US is no longer the leader of this green transition, like under Biden administration, this is not easy for the emerging developing economies because European countries will take the leadership. And if you're talking about leadership of the European countries, it's very ideological rather than, based on the economic rationale. So this somehow will create a sort of like additional transaction costs for the emerging developing countries, to pursue the idea of this energy transition. Because they said that probably the requirement will be very difficult. And honestly speaking, Timer, this is a problem with the many emerging developing economies. The issue of the energy transition or climate is always considered as a luxury goods. Yeah, because we are too busy with the day-to-day problem, with the issue of poverty, the poor quality of infrastructure. So in order to put this energy transition or environment in the government agenda is to link it with the issue of development. Without that, I don't think the government will put the priority on the energy transition and their policy.
I want to connect this with your earlier point that bad times make for good policy. If I travel to India, for example, I see issues related to water shortage, to steady rise in summer temperature, really creating havoc. And as a result, you don't really have to convince people on the need to reduce particulate emission. Are we so fortunate in Indonesia that climate change is not visible in our face?
It is, but this is what the behavioral economists call the present bias, right? Because the priority for people, they will think, well, this issue of this climate probably will happen in the 2050, 2060, and for a politician, why should I spend my political capital if my successor will take the benefit of it, right? It is better for us, for example, to focus on something that's tangible. Yeah, if you do something on climate, you cannot cut the ribbon for the improving of the climate, right? This is really one generation. But you can cut the ribbon for the building bridges. And politicians, don't forget about the political cycle. It's 5 years. They need to build something that's really tangible. That is why the incentive is how to link this issue, the climate issue, with the issue of development that could be sort of like something that tangible for politicians. So if I may give an example, the issue of the job creation is important, okay? Why don't the government create the so-called the cash for work, but the project is mangrove? So you use the green project to create a jobs.